All right, how's it going, everyone? And welcome to my channel. This is an educational channel. We look at theories of everything in depth and try to, figure out how to use them, figure out the best way to, allow these great all-encompassing theories to benefit our own lives. Today is our 574th video that we've done on the reciprocal system of theory. And I apologize for yesterday. My computer just died out right in the middle of reading from one of Mr. Larson, Dewey B. Larson, the originator of the reciprocal system of theory. In the middle of reading one of his chapters in his book, The Road to Permanent Prosperity. And so we'll start up today where we left off yesterday, or slightly before that, the beginning of that paragraph. And hopefully my computer will rally today and stay alive a little bit longer. Now, Mr. Larson was an American engineer who lived from 1898 until 1990. In 1959, he proposed his two fundamental postulates, which set out his basic reciprocal system. The first postulate states that the universe is composed entirely of one component, motion, existing in 3 dimensions, in discrete units, and with 2 reciprocal aspects, space and time. Okay, so Larson was one of a handful or 2 of scientists from past years who have attempted to construct their cosmology on motion, not matter, not energy, but motion. And I think Larson was able to make that work because of his definition of motion, the relationship between space and time, which sets out a reciprocal relationship between space and time. But also, Larson saw motion in a more generic form as scalar motion. It's a motion that has a magnitude, but it has no specific direction. And this is an all omnipresent motion, meaning that it is always occurring. There is no place of rest. Everything in the universe of motion is in motion. And so even when you feel like you're meditating and you've reached your still, your point of utter stillness, you are still subject to the motion of what he calls the progression of the natural reference system. So this is scalar motion can be envisioned using a balloon and a magic marker. If you put dots on the balloon, then you blow up the balloon, all of the dots will be moving away from each other. Every dot will be moving away from every other dot. And it's really not the dots per se that are moving. It's the locations themselves that are moving, and they're carrying the dots with them. So, every dot will be moving away from every other dot, and so every dot will basically be moving in every direction. So there is no ability to, specify a specific direction, at least not until you define a reference point, which is defined arbitrarily by saying that this reference point is motionless. So you're really, moving into an abstraction there when you're starting to define the reference point. Without that abstraction, you cannot define the direction of that motion. It's only in or out. Outward is, when you are expanding the balloon. Inward is when you're contracting the balloon. Outward is the all present or omnipresent motion that Larson calls the progression. And when that progression occurs at 1 unit of space per 1 unit of time, then he calls it, which is also known as the speed of light, Larson calls it the progression of the natural reference system. And that is, always there at all times in all places. And that is the source of everything in this universe. And it is harnessed only by reversing it and turning that outward motion by reversing it in 3 dimensions. Then it can reverse into that inward motion of the balloon, which he calls gravitation. Now, when we're talking about dimensions, we're getting into the weeds a little bit, but in Larson's world, there's a difference between what he calls vectorial dimensions and scalar dimensions. And there are 3 dimensions of scalar motion in Larson's system, but it only requires 1 dimension of scalar motion to define 3 dimensions of vectorial motion. So a vector is a motion in a direction. So it is a motion that has direction. And that motion can be defined with X, Y, Z coordinates. It's not Euclidean, it's, I can't remember the guy that they named it after. But those coordinates are 3 dimensions, but that's just 1 dimension of scalar motion. The other 2 dimensions of scalar motion cannot be represented in a reference system. They can be represented by their net motions in a what you would call in a scalar manner, but you cannot represent them accurately in any type of reference system. And so I guess Larson has proposed this natural reference system, a moving reference system, which is the system that the universe actually operates upon. Now, Larson has books on physics and chemistry and astronomy, but he also has books on metaphysics, a book on metaphysics, which has sections on philosophy and religion, dream interpretation, psychology, biology. And he has 2 books on economics. And we're looking at one of those books today, The Road to Permanent Prosperity. And these are also based on this universe of motion. So Larson has an economic mechanism made out of motion as well. And in that economic mechanism, the 2 reciprocal aspects are purchasing power and goods. Really, they are production and consumption. And the items that are produced and consumed are purchasing power and goods. And Larson puts, attempts to put a what you would call a economic science, or as Ron Satz calls it, econophysics, into this world of what he calls sociological economics, where the economists are really just pushing policy. They have their left wingers or right wingers or whatever. They have their pet philosophies, their ethical mindsets, and they're trying to impose that on the economy. And Larson states that no, the economic mechanism first has to comply with the laws of physics. And sometimes the laws of physics aren't to your liking. We may wish that we could flap our wings and fly away, but the laws of physics do not, enable that. And so we have to deal with the fact that we're earthbound, that we can walk and run, but we can't fly. Now, we can come up with a machine that will do that, but, that took a lot of doing. So the main point is that your economic system has to comply with the laws of physics. And then you can start imposing your philosophical viewpoints upon it. And so Larson arrives at a number of different principles that he contends are mathematically exact and, and precise about how the economic system operates. He also arrives at a flow chart of, the motions of the economic system, of the modern economic system. First, he starts with the primitive economics, what he calls the Robinson Crusoe economics of just one person on a deserted island, and then gradually he imposes the iron law of the economic system, which is work or starve. You have to produce something, or else you're not going to survive. And then gradually introduces first barter with another person on maybe a neighboring island or whatever, and then money, something that is more portable to make barter more convenient, and then employees, where somebody is a producer, but they are producing so much that they hire somebody else, and that person then has a completely different dynamic, because that person is being paid money for their production, and so they're participating in really a different economic stream of transactions. And so there's really two different streams, one of goods and one of I guess purchasing power or money. And that schematic or flow chart, I'll put that up on the thumbnail for this video, and for most of the previous videos, it's the thumbnail. So you can take a look at it and see that there are two streams. One of them is going in one direction, and one of them is circular. So one of them is going around and around. One of them goes from one point to the other. Now, Larson, we are in the chapter here that's called Dealing with Recessions. The main point of this book, Larson's two books on economics, one is called The Road to Permanent Prosperity, this one, and the other is called The Road to Full Employment. Larson contends that those are two different things, and they have to be addressed differently. They have to be, there is a way to achieve full employment in the economy, and there is a way to create permanent prosperity, meaning that you are eliminating the boom and bust cycle of the economic system. You're basically tamping it down so that instead of going up and down wildly, it just kind of hums along at the same level, which is prosperous. And so, but the way to create that, humming is through really the manipulation of what he calls the reservoirs, which are the storage of goods, storage of money, but particularly the money. And so that is how you deal with the booms and busts. And Larson is going to kind of discuss this in the last chapters of this book. We're already on chapter 22 here. And so we're going to try to finish chapter 22 right now, and then finish this book hopefully in the next week or so. Now, if you'd like to start at the beginning of this book, go back in the archives about 7 weeks, and you should be able to find chapter 1 and start from there. If you'd like more information about the reciprocal system and how it operates, check out any of my first 474 videos on this subject, and I'll go into a little bit more detail about the fundamental postulates, the consequences of the postulates, the deduction of the postulates, and what has come from those postulates. But for now, we're going to get into the end here of chapter 22, Dealing with Recessions. There are many variations of these subsidy schemes. He's in a section, right now he's talking about many proposals that have been arrived at by mainstream economists in order to deal with recessions. And he says that some of these are sound and some of these are not sound. Some of these should be used by themselves. Some of them should be used in conjunction with other things. And some of them I use and I will use, but only piecemeal or whatever. So he's surveying the different schemes that other economists have used to deal with recessions, and then eventually he's going to arrive at his proposals for these things. So he's talking about subsidy schemes, and this is one of the final ones. Like he talked about scrip, he talked about pump priming, and things like that earlier in this chapter. So now he's talking about subsidy schemes. There are many variations of these subsidy schemes, some of which call for operating through the agency of retailers. Others involve preferential treatment for special groups, and still others call for gifts or loans to all consumers. An interesting example of the latter is the social credit plan, which was actually approved by the voters of the province of Alberta, Canada at one time, but which, for various reasons, was never put into effect. This plan, in its original form, contemplated a social dividend to be paid regularly to all citizens as a means of stimulating production and consumption. All of these consumption subsidies fail at the same point. They merely transfer purchasing power from one group to another. Contrary to the contentions of their advocates, They do not create any additional real purchasing power. They merely alter the money labels. The social dividend, if it ever materializes, will not enable the citizens of Alberta to buy the least bit more than they get without it. Their ability to buy the goods that they want is not limited by the supply of money or the availability of credit or the phases of the moon. The limit is set by the aggregate net value of the goods which Alberta produces. In the long run, they can buy this much and no more, regardless of how many ingenious financial schemes they may play around with. All that will be accomplished by the social dividend is to take some goods away from those who have labored to produce them and give them to others. Of course, we will meet the familiar contention that the increase in spending due to the subsidy payments will increase demand and will cause an increase in production in response to the greater demand. But both actual experience and theoretical analysis show that such subsidy programs do not increase demand in terms of real values. The most that they can do is to cause an increase in terms of money values, which is inevitably offset by an equal rise in prices. If the cost of the program is met by taxes levied on the general public, the purchasing power of the taxpayers is reduced in exactly the same amount as that of the dividend recipients is increased. Let me try that sentence again. If the cost of the program is met by taxes levied on the general public, the purchasing power of the taxpayers is reduced in exactly the same amount as that of the dividend recipients is increased. And the total purchasing power of the community remains unchanged. If the cost is met by taxing producers, the production price goes up equally with the purchasing power. The market price necessarily conforms, and again, nothing has been accomplished. There is a greater amount of money available for buying purposes, but it will not buy any more goods. No juggling of the money labels attached to goods or to labor can alter their real value. While most of the proposals for subsidizing all consumers are still in the discussion stage, subsidies for special groups have proliferated rapidly during the last few decades. Aid is now being extended to the farmers, to the veterans, to the aged, to the youth, to the indigent, to the migratory workers, to the infirm, to the unemployed. The list is almost endless. It is outside the scope of a scientific work to pass judgment on these measures from the overall standpoint. Some of them have non-economic aspects that far outweigh the purely economic considerations, but all of them should be judged on the basis of these outside merits, as none of the subsidy programs benefits the general economy. None of them contributes toward increasing production volume or toward business stabilization. Hence, they do not help maintain or restore prosperity. If the citizens of the nation clearly understand that the only effect of such a program is to take income away from the general public and give it to the favored group, and they are willing to approve the program on that basis, there can be no economic objection to such action. But the attempts that are being made to promote such programs as measures that will benefit the economy as a whole, that will provide purchasing power with which to buy the products of American industry are misrepresentations of the worst kind. Any purchasing power that is provided by these subsidies can come only from one source: the pocketbooks of those who are not subsidized. If it is not taken from them by taxation, it will be taken just as surely by inflation. The underlying reason for all economic activity, without which the branch of knowledge that we call economics would not exist at all, is the work or starve order to which the human race has been subjected by a higher authority than Congress or Parliament, and from which there is no appeal. Based as it is on this harsh and inflexible edict, factual economics in its entirety is cold and inhuman, not antagonistic to human wishes and desires, but, like factual science, completely indifferent to them. It makes no difference if our motives are highly commendable or if the objectives that we are attempting to reach are above reproach. We either comply with the natural laws, however distasteful they may be in some instances, or we go down to certain failure. It would indeed be an easier world to live in if the daydreams conjured up from the fertile imaginations of our wishful thinkers would actually work. How pleasant it would be if we could solve all our economic problems just by raising wages and lowering prices. And think of the headaches that would be avoided if we could make the nation prosperous by the simple expedient of subsidizing everyone, or if we could spend ourselves into affluence. Many of these things are things that we're actually trying right now, and that we think that they're going to work. Universal basic income and just printing more money. But anyway, back to Larson. But such dreams come true only in fairyland. In the cold, practical world where we live and go about our daily tasks in the shadow of the work or starve decree, there is no something for nothing. No matter how cleverly the true effects of these subsidy programs may be concealed, the general public has to pay the bills simply because the burden cannot be unloaded onto anyone else. In order to make any actual progress towards solving our economic problems, we must come down out of the clouds, abandon the something for nothing illusion, and base our corrective measures on solid economic ground. Okay, now this section is called Conclusions. Almost all of the expedients discussed in this chapter have been tried out at one time or another. A few of them in a modest way, most of them on a massive scale during the Depression years of the 30s under the auspices of the so-called New Deal. It is a tribute to the zeal, if not to the judgment, of the guiding spirits of the New Deal administration that 2 out of every 3 of the worthless schemes that have been discussed so far were included in their assortment of Depression killers. Not all variations of each plan have been tried, of course, as the number of versions is almost unlimited, and there is always a loophole for diehard enthusiasts to claim that the failure of their pet program was due to the omission of essential details or to faulty administration, rather than to inherent defects. The fact remains, however, that in one way or another, all of these schemes have been weighed in the balance and found wanting. The analysis in the foregoing pages shows that the failures were not due to administrative errors or chance misfortunes. They were due to the basic inability of these plans to exert any forces tending to correct the purchasing power unbalance that was responsible for the Depression. All of these plans were evaluated by means of the same yardstick, the principles and relations developed in the earlier chapters. The correlation between the theoretical appraisal and the results actually attained in practice thus serves not only to eliminate the possibility that the failure of some one or more of the plans may have been accidental rather than inevitable, but also accomplishes the purpose which constitutes the principal reason for discussing these worthless plans in this work. A demonstration that evaluations made on the basis of these theoretical principles do coincide with experience, and that economic science can explain why these measures failed. Ability to identify the reasons for the failure of unsuccessful programs is, of course, a strong indication of the existence of a similar ability to identify the necessary features that a program must have in order to be successful. Okay, that is the end of chapter 22 on dealing with recessions. Chapter 23 is called the boom dampeners. And we will approach that chapter tomorrow when we get started. And I believe there's 26 chapters to this book, so we just have 4 more chapters to go. And then I don't know exactly where we're going to go from there after that. I think we're going to do some more stuff on the reciprocal system, but I do believe that we are probably going to take a hiatus from the reciprocal system for a little while. We've gone over several books on the reciprocal system, and I think that everything else that we would have to go over is a little bit advanced. So I'm just wanting to lay down the kind of the basics of the reciprocal system, and then we can move into some geometry, some music, some ancient history, or some nutrition, something, some other cosmologies, and then eventually come back to the reciprocal system. But we'll figure it out. In the meantime, come back and we'll check out chapter 23 on boom dampeners tomorrow. Meanwhile, thanks for tuning in today, and have a great day.